Welcome everybody to the latest edition of Breaking the Silence, the Conversations. As I've promised, we're looking at recording some new content. We've been focusing primarily on NHS whistleblowers, first-time whistleblowers on the whole, in addition to a series on vaccine injury victims. Today, I'm actually delighted to bring in somebody that has been working really hard on data, on looking into the MHRA in particular, Medicines Health Regulatory Authority. So I'm delighted to have a conversation about the work that Cheryl has been doing around MHRA, and in particular around work on one of my prime concerns, actually. And just a bit of background, one of the reasons I was struck off, in inverted commas, was that I was really unhappy that the vaccine was rolled out in pregnancy. We watched as the ages got younger and younger for the non-pregnant population, but then they started to go for children and pregnant women. And it always appeared to me that there was just a lack of data, that we were effectively lab ratting pregnant women. And I didn't like that as a doctor, as a safeguarding doctor, just as a human being, that we should not be experimenting on pregnant women. And so one of the victims of mine, in inverted commas, was actually an obstetrician who was making very bold, premature claims of safety long term. And so I called it out. And that was my beef, really. And to this day, I've not been in receipt of any of the data that would back up a claim of safety in pregnancy when they started giving these jabs out to the pregnancy cohort in April 2021, and given that they were excluded from the clinical trial. So with no further ado, I would love to welcome Cheryl Granger to the podcast. Welcome, Cheryl, and thank you for joining me today.
Hi everybody.
Could you give a little bit of background about you, Cheryl, and what you've been up to?
Okay. Well, at the moment I'm keeping myself warm. I've got a big thick jumper on. I basically I'm from the north, which is why I have this funny accent. And I did a university course that was in the engineering school. It was industrial technology and management, and that made you look at all different parts of industry. So that gave you a kind of good appreciation of how things should be run. And eventually I ended up working for pharma, and I was in training consultants. I'm self-employed at the moment. And through that work, training medical reps, I did anatomy and physiology and diseases. I did immunology and all the bugs. I went through development of a medicine, so I knew about clinical trials and how a drug should be developed and how long it takes and all the rest of it. So I had a very good appreciation of things not being right from the start with COVID.
So that sounds like the CV of a tin hat conspiracy theorist right there.
Yeah, it fits me a treat. The other thing was, one of my courses when I was doing a lot of training courses was problem solving and decision making, and I found it brilliant. It's hard to do. You had 4 flip charts then, and you had to go from one to the other and what have you. And the thing that most people do is they don't define the problem properly. So industry in particular has a problem and they keep solving it in the same way. So obviously it doesn't get solved. And that taught you how to define your problem and start working through a process of actually analysing what your situation is and getting to the root of how you should solve it. So that was very good for what I was doing as well. So yeah, I'm not a medic, although I do have a big bent towards biology, and I do understand a lot of these things. And I've worked in it for quite a long time. So yeah, that's my background, and that's what kind of, I was awake right from the start. So I didn't mask. I didn't do anything that I was asked to do. I didn't ever test, and I never had a vaccine. So there you go.
So
that's
a real
me.
rebel of the cause. So when did you start to smell a rat? Was it just everything? Was it just the whole package of
right at the beginning?
rules?
It was those Three Stooges on the telly every night telling you about deaths and what have you, and I didn't believe it. And then I found out that in India, they always tell you how many people have survived. There's always another way of looking at these things. So I just found the whole thing peculiar. And I know with politicians, if you say the same thing 3 times, it's supposed to get the message across. And that's what we had. We had the 3 people there. We had the 3 statements on the stands they were in front of. So I just found the whole thing very strange. And in August 2020, I went on my first protest in my life. And I knew it was on, and I woke up And I thought, if you don't go to this, you'll be really disgusted with yourself that you haven't gone. And I made myself go. My kids thought I was crackers. My daughter told me she'd get me out of jail if I was locked away. And off I went. And I just thought, what if there's nobody else there? What if I'm on my own when I get there? And that was my first outing on a train for months. And I saw everybody apart from me masked. And I felt like I was in zombie town. That made me feel so uneasy. There was a girl opposite me and she was masked, giving me, I could tell by her eyes, she was disgusted with me sitting there with it. I couldn't wear a mask if I was going to a protest about it or not wearing it. So she was there and she pulled down her mask to blow her nose on the mask to put it up again. And I gave her just a disgusted look back again. And I just thought, people's brains aren't attached, they're not thinking. They're not
It's the ones,
actually.
it's like the ones in the restaurant that were pulling it down to eat and put it back up again, wasn't it? It's just
Yeah,
mental. And
yeah,
the
yeah.
people playing their instruments through the hole in their mask. So
Yeah.
the orchestra, so
So
you see the images now when we look back and think
yeah,
people have collectively lost their mind. And we've seen that
yeah,
in the sort of investigation of mass formation psychosis. It literally is a
yeah.
psychosis, isn't it? Led by a
It is, and
massive
then
psychological operation.
and now we've got flu, haven't we? So people, those who like masks, are wearing them again. I have tried a mask on once or twice, and I just found it so horrible. You're breathing in your old stale air. You've got all bugs coming out of you that get trapped in the mask, not the viruses, of course, they sail through. But you've got things that are there that you're re-inhaling. You're not supposed to be doing that. It's just the most ridiculous thing ever. And of course, the flu, it's come early. It's not peaked as high as it normally does, and it's gone. It's going. You know, and all this thing about the
The
hospitals can't cope.
flunami, as they called it, the flunami
Yeah,
that never kind of happened, did it? They got the fear porn out, didn't they? And it kind of
yeah,
fizzled out into a bit of a damp squib in the end. So,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
bonkers. And actually,
So,
it's
so
all
I
the
did
people
all.
that had the jab that got sick,
So
ironically.
I did
People
all
who
the
got
protests. That was quite interesting. So a lot of policemen in masks. Then the next time you went out, they weren't in masks. Then they were in masks again. I mean, it was all just, it was a farce, really. I remember talking to Alan Miller at one of them, and I said, "Are the press not here?" And he says, "Yes, that lady there in the black coat is here." I said, "Oh, who's she with?" "Russia Today." I thought, "Oh, great, we've got got Russia Today and nobody from Britain." So there you go. It's
the
that
mask
was
kind
my
of tipped
background.
you over the edge. The mask cultism, really, or the mask fetish, let's say, was one of the things.
Just
But then,
yeah. I mean, I still in the co-op here, they've got the perspex screens up, and you always get stuck on it trying to get your shopping in your bag. And right when they were taking all these things down, I said to them, "Isn't it about time you took this down and made it easy?" "No, it's stopping people stealing money," they said. So they found it effective in stopping thieves, so they were leaving them back up again. Yeah.
well, it certainly
Anyway,
didn't do anything about stopping jams. But you have to go past the perspex, don't you, to actually pay the cashier?
yeah,
So it's
it
just a
is.
little bonkers. And
It is.
so what have you been up to? Because I know last time we spoke, you've been data crunching and trying to poke the MHRA bear, let's call it. So the
Yeah.
reason kind of we came to have this conversation was because of the Substack that you wrote recently about the MHRA and its kind of concealment of data around pregnancy. So you've been trying your best to get this data that I've been searching for. How
Yeah.
did this start then for you, the journey around?
Well, to start off with, I heard a video a few months after she'd done it from June Rain, who was then the CEO. Obviously, she's not anymore. And she was spouting forth about their means of looking at side effects from the vaccines. And there were four means. They were so proud of it. There were four means of doing this. There was a yellow card, which obviously we got data about the yellow card. And there was this yellow card vaccine monitor. And then she started spouting forth that there were 2,000 pregnant women in this monitor. And I thought, well, we haven't got any data on pregnant women. That would be good. So I wrote me FOI to June Rain to ask her for the pregnancy data. And I didn't do it right. I did it through 9 questions, which apparently I wasn't supposed to do, but that's what I did. And the last question, the ninth question, was did the information they got out the monitor change the risk benefit ratio that they had on pregnancy? Only they wouldn't have understood that because the MHRA always talk about benefit risk. Because they've only got in their eyes benefits, they've no risk. So, so that was my last question. Anyway, that was, believe it or not, it was the 13th I sent it off, which is probably not a good day, April 2023. Okay. And I finally had my final hearing in February 25. So it took 2 years. What happened was they came back to me in the required time, and they sent me a refusal that they wouldn't give me answers because they cited this section 22 of the FOI Act, which is that they had an intention to publish. Didn't say when, didn't say if it was 10 years' time, next week, or whatever, but they had this intention because they wanted peer review and publish the monitor data, which is crackers because your yellow card data was released fortnightly with them making analysis of it. And this is real-time data. This is people being asked. So let me just explain. There was a whole load of invites went out. 36,604 people joined the monitor. So that was asking them how they were, asking them when they took the vaccine or when they were what kind of vaccine they'd taken, which one. So they had all that information on them, and then they followed them up at regular intervals, and they asked them about 10 or 12 tick boxes as to were they seeing anything like this, a bit of fever, a bit of sore arm, a bit of all the minor things. And then they could do a free text data entry, which allowed them to waffle on about anything else that was wrong with them. So they had this monitor ongoing. What they sent me with my refusal was an interim report, which was a bit mad. I didn't understand it, but they sent an interim report. That report was the MHRA presenting the results by July 21 of the monitor, which had started in January 21. And they presented it to the PEAG. They've got all these, the CHM have got all these special committees. So that's the Pharmacovigilance Expert Advisory Group. And what do? They advise on risk. Okay. So they did this presentation. We were sent the report. Professor Norman Fenton analysed it for me and couldn't get over it because it was ridiculous. So, I mean, overall, they said that 51% of everybody had at least one adverse reaction, and 41% of the pregnant ladies, there was 1,300 and odd at that point, had at least one adverse reaction, which presumably could have been something or nothing. And nothing was done with that. There was nothing that came back after the meeting. There were no follow-ups from the PAG. There were no further interim reports as we went through this, and it lasted for 2 years, the monitor. And I just didn't understand it. And Norman did a very good analysis of it and pulled it all to pieces and basically told me to keep going. So I asked for an internal review, which is great, isn't it? So that's the MHRA reviewing themselves. So guess what? They think they've done the right job. And then I went on to complain to the Information Commissioner's Office. It's very laborious and very boring and all the rest of it. And the ICO, surprisingly enough, upheld the decision. So I was advised to go to a first tier appeal, first tier tribunal, and that with the General Regulatory Council. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was learning as I went along, and I put a lot of work into getting that as best I could. I had some advice from a very kind legal bod who pointed me in the right direction and told me legal aspects to add in. They then asked the MHRA to become the second respondent. So the ICO, instead of just me going against them, the MHRA agreed they wanted to be part of it. At one point, I was told that June Rain was going to be their witness, which would have been fun, but she didn't in the end. So we then were supposed to have the tribunal in September 24, and they weren't ready. They made all sorts of excuses. There was little old me, but chomping at the bit. I got my statement and all the rest of it ready. They weren't ready, so that became a directions hearing, and I basically was told that on the 13th of November that they were going to pre-print the results of their monitor. And then I got 4 emails to shut me up, to tell me to withdraw. They'd also sent me the answers to my questions, which with what we knew from the preprint, which I got a copy of, they couldn't say what they said, especially on pregnancy. That they didn't have the data to back up the statements they were making.
It sounds
So
like,
it
I
was
mean,
all about,
every attempt they're putting barriers up to conceal, to obfuscate. And here you are. I mean, any mere mortal other than yourself would have probably given up at this point. But all you are is as a member of the public concerned, seeing this vaccine rolled out on the pregnancy cohort, asking, where's your data? Where's your data?
yeah.
Because on TV, we're seeing all the TV doctors telling pregnant women it's safe and effective long term in some
And,
cases. Where's the data
and
to back that up? And at every level, you're getting blocked by MHRA, who obviously
yeah,
changed their stance on their position, didn't they, when June Rain actually announced, didn't she, that we're a big pharma enabler now? Do you remember that? And she called
yeah,
it, she said,
yeah.
the MHRA are enablers now, which was a bit
And
disturbing.
that's what they've done. I mean, they're 86% funded by pharma, and they go along with what pharma wants. And they basically are there to do pharmacovigilance, which is safety, drug safety. And they were set up, and it came after a lot of committees after thalidomide. So we had the thalidomide scandal, the 1968 Medicines Act, that stated that nothing could be prescribed to a pregnant woman without proper process to assess it. So, of everybody that they're looking after, pregnant women should be a special group. And to actually give the COVID vaccines to pregnant women at the same time as everybody else is a load of nonsense. We've never done that before. That's the
Whilst
first
telling them
time
to
that's
stop
ever happened.
eating soft cheese and raw fish at the same
Yeah,
time, it's just
yeah.
bonkers. So I mean,
Take
just
this.
that statistic, just to mention it again, 50%, so 1 in 2 people who were pregnant. I keep saying people, I should say ladies who were pregnant. Uh,
They say people at the MHRA and the
I know they
analysing.
do. They put the pronouns after their names as well on their emails too. But yeah, so 1 in 2, and obviously at that point we're not knowing how severe, whether it's just a swollen arm or something more sinister. But did I read somewhere in your podcast that this was later kind of classified as severe in 1 in 7, and it said only 1 in 7? Was that right?
Yeah. So
Only 1 in 7.
it was a bit peculiar because, as I say, I didn't know what I was doing. We were supposed to go to a hearing in December and we didn't. We came in front of the judge and she said we had to do this Scotch schedule, which obviously I didn't know what that was. And that's like you do with a builder's argument. So one says what they thought the problem was and how much it was going to cost, and the other one comes back, and then you have 4 columns and you argue it out on paper. So they'd got my questions, they'd answered them, and I was allowed to pull it all to pieces in terms of, what Norman, and I had a whole team of very, very well qualified people who wanted to join in and give me advice on this. So my column, by the time I printed it up, it was 32 pages long, and that probably upset them. So they just believed that they were correct in what they'd said. But as you say, what happened was they had produced this preprint, and one of the things they said in the results paragraph was that they said only to start off with. It didn't, when it was published, have only in it, so they must have been told to take that out. But it said only 13.7%, that's 1 in 7, had a medically serious event. Because, of course, I'd asked for the pregnancy data, but this was a preprint on the whole thing. So that was overall, that was the 36,604 people. 1 in 7 of them had a medically serious event. Well, if you know anything about MHRA and the qualification of a serious event, that's death, something that's life-threatening, something that requires hospitalisation, something that leads to disability, which might be temporary or permanent, and congenital or birth defect. So there are 5 categories. And what we're saying is 1 in 7 people who were in their monitor had one of those categories of side effect. And they were quite happy to say it's still safe, but 1 in 7 had this. So that's like going to buy a car and the man who's just sold it, you say, oh, by the way, 1 in 7 cars that drive away from here, it ends up in somebody being killed or in hospital or what have you.
And this is
It's the most.
absent. This is absent. I presume this little nugget of information, the 1 in 7, is absent from any sort of consenting process in the antenatal clinics where they're jabbing not only with COVID jabs even now, but the flu and the RSV and rota and all the rest of it at the same time. So
Oh,
as you mentioned, it's a due diligence. You tell with pregnant women, you treat them with cotton wool, don't you? You don't give them drugs if you can at all help it. That's even down to paracetamol, and the BNS very clear on, we've got no
yeah.
data on this. We don't think that it's harmful based on clinical lab rat in your pregnant women. So they're all even on the fence about things like commonly prescribed antiemetics, etc. But here we're talking about a completely different model. It's a got to be careful about what I call it. It's a different technology. It's a gene-based platform, never been used on humans, let alone pregnant women.
Yeah. And of course, they said that COVID was worse. The actual infection was worse in pregnant women than in.
I remember at the time seeing patients and where they were being told categorically that it doesn't cross the placenta. You know, the spike protein's not expressed, it's not in breast milk, and then lo and behold, even in the published press, plenty of articles showing that it does cross the placental boundary. It is found in breast milk, and some of the conclusions of those articles, so it says we found it in the breast milk, we found it crosses the placenta, and it's found in fetal, but we don't think it does anything. We don't think it has any physiological role. That spike protein and mRNA. So, you know, this is a science that we're dealing with, the science, you know, where we don't think we found it in the breast milk, but we don't think it does anything to the baby. It's okay, you know, just carry on. You know, this is what we're dealing with. It's bonkers.
And this is, you know, this isn't a very good analysis at all, but we've got information in it. And the team of people I had looking at it and advising me on how bad it is, because obviously they know a lot more about stats than I do. I'll just read it you. They said all different words like misleading, meaningless, underestimated, obfuscated, serious omissions, interpretation is inadequate, etc., etc. Those are the sorts of things that kept coming back to me when I emailed the preprint to everybody. So it didn't answer the freedom of information questions that I'd asked, and there's no comeback on that. So the actual conclusion that the judge came to when I was dismissed, it's a horrible word that, but you've gone to all this trouble, you've played for 2 years and now you're dismissed. It said the MHRA and indeed the Commissioner had accepted that the public interest was weighted in favour of the release of information, but this had to be balanced against the need to have proper analysis of all the data and a considered overview of safety. And it's as if the MHRA are the only ones that can analyse it, and they have made a right mess of trying to analyse this information. It said the publication of the raw data would be misused, misquoted, or misunderstood because we're not capable.
1 in 7's 1 in 7. You can't really mess around with that, can you?
And they finally say misinformed hysteria about the vaccine may equally put lives at risk. So we're into misinformed hysteria now, which is terrible.
Facts are facts. And if you think about any other drug that's caused a serious side effect at a ratio of 1 in 7, the drug wouldn't stand a chance. It'd be out. It wouldn't be on the shelves.
Yeah.
It certainly wouldn't be injected into pregnant women, you know, and their unborn babies. So we've got here a very sinister. We've just seen it, haven't we, Cheryl, with the UK HSA and the excess death mortality. They wouldn't separate it out by vaccine status because they didn't want to, again, quote, cause alarm and distress for the widows and widowers.
And this is the same process that Claire, Craig and Molly went through. But in a way, I went one better because I actually got their published. I forced them into publishing because they did that to shut me up. And they were so proud of what they'd done as if it was absolutely wonderful and proving a point. But it didn't. It proved everything that you and I and everybody else was saying about pregnancy. So their monitor, the pregnant women were there on average for 73 days. Then they left. Okay, so it went a range of 5 to 244 days. So they didn't even have a proper set of data on a full pregnancy. And why were those women leaving? You know, I mean, obviously, if you lose your baby, for example, you're not going to be filling in your monitor. There was no follow-up with any meaning with any of these. They didn't know the trimester of pregnancy that they'd been vaccinated in 30% of the pregnant women. I mean, most women know when they're due and know which trimester they're in. So that question wasn't handled. And of course, that's very important because if you go back to thalidomide, they're only, there were certain days in the first trimester that affected the fetus so badly, and that was about 35, I think it was, to day 50. So it was very important in pregnancy, where we're dealing with 2 lives, mum and baby, to find out if there are any detrimental effects because of the trimester in which the vaccine's given. If you look, there were 2,514 women who were pregnant in this monitor by the end. And if you look at normal rates for spontaneous abortions, they should be 106. In this monitor, there were 19 reported. So that's how poor it was. They had congenital abnormalities listed against 8, but they didn't give you any details of it. They didn't seem to be interested in that. And then preterm births, there were 4 that were mentioned in the pretext data. This is the bit where you can make your own comments. Now, that was the first and only time that they mentioned this free text data. We didn't get any of that data. And you've heard about the V-Safe in America.
Yes.
This is the equivalent, but of course, V-Safe in America has 10 million people in it. So obviously a lot more data. And if you remember, Aaron, Syrian, ICANN and what have you went after the V-Safe data because, again, the CDC, after a few years, was not releasing it, just like the MHRA wasn't releasing the monitor because it's more specific and more useful information. So they went after and got it court ordered to be released to them. And then they went back for the free text data. And if you read some of that, it's harrowing. That is people regularly reporting a death or a very serious side effect and getting no response from anybody. And to actually sit there as a person at the CDC doing the analysis, if they ever looked at it, that free text data would want you to do something because it's so harrowing. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, breastfeeding, there was 53%, just over 53% of the breastfeeding mums reported in the monitor who had 900 adverse drug reactions. So, and the other thing was there were 1,421 missing women within the monitor, you know, that they didn't have information on. And it seemed as if you didn't actually respond. If you're a non-respondent, they assumed you hadn't got any adverse drug reaction. And that can't possibly be. It might be your adverse drug reaction was so serious, the 1 in 7, that you'd left. So it's the most peculiar thing. And they were supposed to follow each pregnant woman up after 10 weeks, 10 weeks after they supposedly gave birth. And they only did about 50% of them were followed up. So you can't, you know, that's a critical failure of the data anyway. So it was an absolute mess. And this was one of their 4 standard ways of looking for any signals. And of course, the signals they were looking for were all predefined. They were things that they assumed they were going to get. So things like VITT and turbocancer, they've got no evidence on that because they didn't actually look for it because it wasn't something they expected. It's the most ridiculous way of looking at anything.
So you've had to fight hard to get this out. So the report's only just come out, hasn't it? But this data was known back when they were telling very publicly pregnant women that it was safe and effective. It's quite sick. It's quite sinister, isn't it? I mean, I've actually been struck off for calling out an obstetrician. It's been sold to the public as harassment campaign. Well, because I called this person an evil witch. I stand by that comment. It probably wasn't the most professional, but somebody telling the pregnant woman and their unborn baby in knowledge of this information, whether they knew it or not. I mean, I was called on the cross-examination of said doctor. I was told I was responsible for the deaths of women and pregnant women and babies by this individual because I had put people off having the vaccine. And she told this tale of somebody who passed away from COVID, and it's because of people like Dr. Cartland that would have put her off the vaccine. And you know, I wrote to her, this individual once, and I just said, "Can you send me the data because I'm seeing you on videos and interviews saying 100% safe. If you can't provide me with the data and the citation, I will report you to the GMC for spreading misinformation, turn it around on them." And GMC filed that under Dr. Cartland, threatened to retaliatory action towards a female colleague. That was a proven charge against my harassment campaign. A very polite email saying, "Why have you contacted my business partner? And secondly, send me the data. I'm really interested. I might have just missed it." And that was filed under threatening retaliatory action, like I'd sent the boys round to beat her up. But anyway, yeah, it's very sinister, isn't it?
But nothing's backed up. They make these sweeping statements and nothing's backed up. And when they make a sweeping statement that 1 in 7 gets a serious adverse reaction, it's never pushed around anywhere. Nobody's using that information. And that's what I want to get out. Because the MHRA...
It should be on the front pages of every newspaper. And there should be a moratorium tomorrow or last year or the year before on this. well, the whole thing on every human, but in particular pregnancy, there's just no justification
Yeah.
for
So
it.
I just want to go on as many places as I can and contact as many people as I can. And it's very difficult because I'm only little me, you know. So, but to me, it's major information that's come straight from the horse's mouth. You know, it's the MHRA's words and it's horrific. And whenever you say it to people, they are horrified. But it's getting that out to people. And of course, the MHRA haven't said this to anybody. So Debbie Evans and I, we basically followed all the MHRI board meetings, which is not the most scintillating thing to do, but they hold them in public every 2 months until this new guy's come in, and we've just been sent one for this month. But when you look at their agenda for the year for these meetings, it's now the next one's July. So they're obviously stopping the public going to the meetings. But through those meetings, we knew that the MHRA were down on staff. This is when they've been given all the Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca information to analyse for license. So they were down on staff by 25%. Anybody that they got on board, they kept telling us at meetings, were inexperienced. So they needed to be trained up. Everybody of their 1,350 members of staff, if they're at full complement, will not be doing analysis. So they've got quite a small staff. They were working from home during this time. And in freedom of information I sent in, I was told that the computers kept crashing, which is no excuse for anything. So the whole setup, and we know from the Pfizer document analysis that Pfizer subsumed, it's called, to everybody, all regulators, basically said, nothing to see here, it's okay, you can license us, or you can give us
And
an
the
emergency use
paradox is,
authorization.
Cheryl, is that, as we said at the beginning, really, that pregnant women were it's an exclusion criteria amongst many other exclusion criteria in the Pfizer data. You know, if you're over 50, under 30, you were excluded. You know, if you're on any drug or had any comorbidity, you were excluded. So it's a very particular subset. And in that subset, I remember reading very early on, and it's one of the reasons I was kicked off a lot of the social media platforms. I did an interview where I went through the Pfizer's early data. So, you know, as we just said, no pregnant women were part of the trial, but there were 274 incidental pregnancies, of which half had an adverse event, and half of that half had a severe adverse event. So 1 in 4. So even worse, had a severe adverse event in that data set. And then they looked at fetal outcomes, didn't they, and said that they only looked at 32. Like we said about follow-up, 32 of the 274 pregnancies, 5 of which were still pregnant, and of the 27, only one born baby.
Yeah.
That's not a red flag. I don't know. one
Well,
live
I
baby.
mean, well, the other thing is in the 3 month follow-up of the Pfizer data, the first 3 months, which went to February 21, they actually had 1,223 deaths. You know, I mean, most things get knocked on the head when they're less than 50, probably far less than that. So, you know, why did we keep going with this? It was just the most ridiculous thing. So it wasn't just pregnant women, it was the whole spectrum of people that were having very serious events that they didn't actually do anything about, which I just found, excuse me, I just found terrible. But as you know, because we met up about the Pfizer document analysis with Chris Flowers and everything when it was nice and hot in Cornwall, yes, and I got involved in bringing that to the UK in terms of that's on my website, so people can go and look at. There's 104 reports that came out of the analysis of 451,000 pages of Pfizer documents that the ICANN and Air and Siri got hold of, and that was analysed by, well, they got 3,250 analysts with no skin in the game. They weren't being paid by anybody. They did it all voluntary, and they analysed this to produce the 104 reports. And some of that covers pregnancy. And I've done it in on my website that's indexed. So if you want to look everything up on pregnancy, you can do so. And then, of course, all of a sudden, the Moderna information, they'd done 2 reports on Moderna stuff. They got 4.8 million pages of Moderna. They were hoping a lot of it was duplicated. Then, before the analysis really started on that, they stopped doing it. So you have to ask questions, why did that happen?
And even this very morning, Cheryl, it's on the radio. I've literally walked in before we press record on this to an advert. Discuss it with your midwife, the COVID vaccine.
Yeah.
Discuss it. I wonder what that discussion entails, other than the repeated mantra of it's safe, it's effective, it will protect your baby.
Well, your midwife doesn't know enough about it to tell you.
Doesn't have a clue,
you can't have informed consent, so they can't. So I went with a friend to a gynae outpatient clinic to hold a hand, and you sit with all the pregnant women as well in that gynae clinic, and there was a wall-size poster of "Get your vaccine while you're here," and at the door next to it was where you went to get your vaccine, and then I had to tie myself down to the chair because I nearly stood up and tried to have a word with them all. It's just the most ridiculous thing that it's still going, that they're actually promoting it still.
But I mean, they treat children like a pincushion now, don't they, with all the various concoctions of. I mean, I've just been speaking to a couple who are telling me about the first set of jabs that their child's going to have, and it's a 6-in-1 and 2 others on top. So this is like 8 different diseases in one sitting. And we're doing the same to pregnant women now. Pregnant women, you wouldn't, like I say, counsel them, don't eat soft cheese, sit, rest, do healthy things for 9 months. However, go and see your midwife and have RSV, flu, COVID, and rota, I think it is off the top of my head. 4 jabs in the same sitting. I mean, absolutely absurd.
My friend went to get her, I think that was a COVID jab. She haven't convinced her. And they wanted to give her I think it was a flu at the same time. And she very sensibly said, "Is it okay to have them at the same time?" And of course, whoever gave it said, "Of course it is." The people lying all the time. They do not know. And that informed consent information is not available or being used. They're just telling people it's fine. And
well, I
it's
get
not.
a lot of worried parents, as you can imagine, come to me, or worried pregnant women coming to me and saying, "Look, my midwife's saying this, or my, paediatrician saying this," and I just tell them to spin it around. The burden of proof is on the injector. The person telling you it's safe and effective has a burden to prove that statement, not you. You don't have to prove unsafe and defective, and that's how we get around some of these cases. Is just say, "Okay, I'm willing to have my daughter jabbed if you can provide me with the reproductive toxicity data, the biodistribution data, carcinogenicity studies for," and then you go through the various adjuvants and chemicals that are in the vial, and it doesn't exist, and then you get a very clammy, pale-looking midwife slash pediatrician, and they just back off them because, like you said, the barefaced lie to a person's face. I've seen the videos of pharmacists being faced off, people recording their consults with obstetricians, and they just say, "Yeah, safe and effective. Are you sure? Are you sure? Is there any data co-administering flu and COVID together?" "Oh, yeah, it's fine." And it's just a lie, isn't it? Because that doesn't exist.
It is, and obviously the childhood vaccines, they've only been they've never been tested against placebo because they're always compared with the previous version of the same thing, and you can keep going back, and the first ones weren't actually against placebo, and then they've only been followed for 4 or 5 days in a lot of cases, so that alone negates it. That 6-in-1, they've never looked at the cumulative effect of giving those all together. They've just looked at each one individually and said it's safe and effective, when actually they've never done a placebo control, and they've only looked at it for a short period of time. And now they add it all together. And if there's risks with one, what is the cumulative risk by giving 6 in one go?
How do we stop this, Cheryl? How do we stop it? Because it's dark, it's sinister, there's pharma fingerprints all over all of this. How do we stop it? Is it going to take legal action from, a pregnant cohort, a class action? And even then you get the whole, it's correlation doesn't equal causation. And it's kind of true in a way. We can't prove it because, again, they're stopping any sort of form of, investigations that will prove that this is spike induced by the mRNA, for example, antibody test specific to that. So how do you ever prove that causation? It's never going to be good enough to bring about a ruling.
I mean, you'll never save the ones that have got the religion of vaccines, that just follow that religion and believe in them, whatever, whether it be a doctor or a patient. You just won't ever. So that group, I think, have gone. But the thing that's terrible is that vaccines have been given indemnity. So when you tell the tale to people that, you know, Reagan got visited by Merck and was told that we can't keep doing court cases and produce these vaccines because we're losing money and what have you. Give us indemnity. He did, instead of saying, well, go away and prove it's safe, or go away and make it safe. And that story just blows my head, because why would anybody say, yes, you know, we're not sure if that car is going to kill you, but we'll let you not be sued if it does. It's the daftest. It's the only product in the world that you can't sue on. So that needs to be removed for a kickoff. And of course, these things, these COVID vaccines, should not be called vaccines, because they're not. They're genetic engineered products. And the reason they're being called vaccines, and the reason they got them on the childhood schedule in the States, was so that it had this indemnity.
That'd be a very interesting kind of obstetric room conversation, wouldn't it? You've got a pregnant lady in front of you and you say, look, you know, this is a vaccine. Well, this isn't a vaccine. Can I inject you and your unborn baby with a novel mRNA-based injection? You know, when you look at the AstraZeneca, you know, there were, I think, 2.5 billion adenoviral vectors per half a mil, you know, with DNA that encoded spike protein. If you were unlucky enough to have Zeneca, Pfizer and Moderna, in my opinion, were worse with the lipid nanoparticle platform. And if you say, look, Mrs. Jones, we've got this gene platform, never used it on pregnant women before, got no data on it. You know, it goes in your breast milk, crosses the placenta, and 1 in 7 of you will have a severe adverse event. Roll up your sleeve, Mrs. Jones. Do you think she'd run out of the room? I would have thought so.
Yeah.
But they're not.
And
just like safe and effective.
I mean, Moderna's 3.5 times the quantity. So Moderna, you've got 30 micrograms in Pfizer and 100 micrograms of mRNA in Moderna. And then you've got Moderna has 25 micrograms in the children's dose, which obviously is nearly the adult dose for Pfizer. And if you've got more mRNA, you've got more lipid nanoparticle around it. You know, it's bonkers. And right at the beginning, in January 21, there's a very good doctor called Vanessa Kruger-Schmidt, who was on the Corona Investigative Committee doing a presentation. And she had been through the EMA's analysis of the products. And she pointed out a lot of things that we came to know. And there were things that the EMA had actually written questions on and queried. And of course, they're supposed to answer within a certain time frame, but they never did. It was all ignored. And she said that they'd done analysis with Pfizer on 10 micrograms, 20 micrograms, and 30 micrograms. And they found out that they got the same effect, and the 30 micrograms created more side effects. But obviously they make more money the more they put into the product. So it kept at 30 micrograms.
Just to look at the converse as well, was COVID killing pregnant women? In my experience, it wasn't, but have you done any dive into that?
No. I mean, as far as I understand it, I haven't seen figures to show that it did kill, you know, a bigger percentage than the general population. You know, it's, I mean,
and that was one of their marketing ploys, though, wasn't it, Cheryl, that COVID does? If you're pregnant, you've got a higher risk of severe illness from COVID. So that was one of the marketing strategies, wasn't it? And of course, I didn't see that in my clinical, humble opinion. You know, obviously I was a GP at that time, but you know, I didn't hear any warning signals coming from my obstetric colleagues or midwives to say that was what they were seeing. Quite the converse. They were saying they were seeing more miscarriages, more complex labours, more instrumental deliveries, more complicated, you know, placentas coming out all dusty and you know, misshaped, calcified. Unbelievable. So quite the converse.
And don't forget, in my monitor, people volunteered to take part. I wouldn't have volunteered to take part because I wouldn't be taking the vaccine. So, you know, they were vaccine people. You know, they were people who went with the flow. So
and we've got to remember, this didn't just apply to pregnant women. It was when they went down the ages as well. So is that trade-off against, is a 30-year-old fit and healthy person going to get COVID? But then they were pushing the COVID vaccine and under that premise of protect your family. And we know it didn't stop transmission. And then you're going for the even younger cohorts, all the way down to 5-year-olds at the very end. And you've got JCVI themselves saying we shouldn't be doing this because risk-benefit analysis, COVID versus the jab itself. There was no data. Again, we mentioned it was an exclusion criteria. You're not allowed to test on kids. But yeah, they overruled the JCVI and gave it.
Can I say that the new CEO of the MHRA is from the JCVI? You know, that revolving thing that keeps going round. So that's got to be an alarm system. Yeah.
Yeah. We also
So
got the regulator. I mean, I've exposed that myself. That the regulator for doctors. So I've had the strike off, and you look at their investment portfolio, and they're investing in Merck, and they're investing in AstraZeneca, and other
yeah,
random things like Nestle and Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola. You know, you're never going to get a fair crack of the whip if MHRA and the regulators are all investing their dollars into big pharma. Craziness.
no, no. And the thing that's so frightening is that if you listen to the MHRA now, mRNA is safe and effective. So we can keep changing what we've got in it and just keep using it, you know, so you develop cancer products and all the rest of it. And that
Well,
to
as Bill
me is
Gates says,
terrifying.
Cheryl, you just mess around with it a bit. Do you remember seeing that video? So
Yeah,
you just mess around with
yeah.
it.
And actually, I mean, I've done a Substack on genetics, and my understanding of it is we don't know what we're doing. You know, you've got so when they first did the genome, they thought that there was going to be about 2 million genes because there's 2 million proteins. You know, a gene makes a protein. You'd think there'd be one for each, but there wasn't. Then they thought it was going to be 100,000, and in the end, it was 19,900 genes. So each gene actually produces 100 proteins. It's a you know it's a very complex system, and all of a sudden we think we can mess about with a gene. And so you might, if you've got a problem with a protein and you find the gene that makes that protein, you might influence the protein that you want to. But what about the other lots that that gene is actually trying to make? You could kill a person because of it. You know, so it's the most, it's this thing that we think we can do these things without the evidence, without the research, without the in-depth understanding. We don't understand the immunity system that well. We don't understand our genetic system that well, and yet we're messing with it. And no wonder we've got the problems we've got.
Keep saying it very slowly to the COVID cultist medics that I know, and they just block you in the end or disappear, cap in hand. I just say, look, I asked them clearly, what do you think you're injecting into people? And they keep saying vaccine, vaccine, vaccine. But no, it's not. It's mRNA, lipid nanoparticles, cocktail with various other things, and it's turning you into a human spike protein factory. You know, widely biodistributed. We knew that from the animal studies. It just doesn't stay in the arm, as they tell you. And you know, your human cells making a non-human protein instructed by the mRNA construct. So your human cells making a non-human protein, and guess what? The immune system doesn't like it, so it
Yeah,
attacks the cells doing such a thing, and that's why we get clots. That's why we get immune deficiency. That's why we get autoimmunity and inflammation and protein deposition disorder, because these proteins cause biological carnage. And I see that in the clients that come to me saying, the doctors just say it's all in my head, or you know, functional neurological disorder when they've
yeah,
got
yeah.
catastrophic
Anxiety.
disability. So you know, if that's not being captured as a, like we said about, you know, keeping up to date with the adverse events like the yellow card and VARS and such like, if we're not going to record and acknowledge, I know people who've had a stroke the day after the vaccine, and it was long COVID that caused the stroke, not the jab they had yesterday. And when you've got a cohort of doctors with their heads so far in the sand, suffering ostrich syndrome, that we're never going to capture this massive amount
No,
of disability and death.
I mean, that's what they don't look at. MHRA never look at cause. They assume it's not. And if you go on their website to register a side effect, it basically says there aren't many side effects that are produced by this treatment. They just because you've got a side effect, it doesn't mean it's come from the treatment. It might be the disease you've got in the first place. And there's 4 things that they say to put you off from thinking that it could possibly be linked to the vaccine. But Jessica Rose, many moons ago, took the Bradford Hill criteria, which is how you prove causation. And the WHO, apparently, whatever you think to them, they accept that Bradford Hill leads to causation. You've only got to make 5 of the 9 criteria fit. And she fitted all of them. She
Yes.
went through the information, and I met her and I said, why aren't we shouting this for the rooftop? You've got all the evidence there that it is caused by the vaccines. The thing that a lot of doctors do is they still say, oh, mRNA, that's in the body, that's natural. Well, it's actually, they've been very clever calling it mRNA because instead of being messenger, which is in the body, it's modified. And they've taken the uracil and they made it into pseudouridine, and you have not got the enzyme to get rid of that. So messenger RNA lasts in the body for a very short period of time, 5 minutes or so, when it's done its job. We can't get rid of this stuff that's been injected. It's not natural. And of course, the person who invented the pseudouridine got a Nobel Prize. Great. So
That's,
there you go. They've done all this
well, I
damage.
mean, this is what the causation correlation brigade, as I call them, who just keep repeating safe and effective in correlation isn't causation. I say to them, well, have you looked at the Bradford Hill criteria? That's what we use in these circumstances as an epidemiological tool for causation when you haven't got a test that says yay or nay. And they look at you like you've just swore at them.
Yeah.
They don't know what it is. And even very early on, the junior doctors, even down to the yellow card system, which was bread and butter, from back when I was training as a doctor, and they just look at you like you mentioned something that they've just never heard of, like the yellow card system. So if you've got a cohort of doctors that deny vaccine injury, keep repeating safe and effective, don't know what the Bradford Hill criteria is, and don't know the yellow card, then you're never going to capture this data at all. Plus, there's all the psychology of willful blindness, cognitive dissonance, buyer's remorse, and everything else thrown into the mix. Imagine waking up in the morning in 2026 knowing that you've been jabbing a pregnant, an obstetric clinic of however many. I don't even know what week do they jab them with COVID jab. Pregnant women, is it any time during the pregnancy?
It seems to be safe any time. That seems to be what they're saying. And of course, as I say, with thalidomide, it was very important when you took the treatment. And unfortunately, thalidomide was used for morning sickness, which happens at the beginning generally, and that's the dangerous time. It was, as I say, 30 to 50, day 30 to 50. So you didn't want to take it in the first trimester, which is when they were taking it. It's very cruel, very cruel.
Comes back to
To
the
keep
fact that
telling.
data doesn't exist, does it? They haven't separated out, which trimester did they give it in and followed up each cohort. Because A,
Well,
it's
as I
unethical,
say,
B, they didn't do it.
yeah, they don't know. In my monitor, they don't know. 30% of them are unknown. It's I don't know how during rain and a lot of these dames that were made during the last 6 years, they were running a lot of things. I don't know how they sleep at night. She's a granny and a mum, and she must know what's going on. I mean, at the inquiry, they asked her about the two manufacturing processes, and she said it was all the same. It's a load of baloney. It's and for somebody who's in her position, in 2005, there was a health select committee that highlighted the fact that pharma was influencing the MHRA too much, that it was obviously funding it. And that was 2005, that's 20 years ago, and nothing's been done. And then you've got the Cumberledge report, and I've seen the head of safety at the MHRA sat on a stage with Cumberledge, and she said that a lot of the people out there think that your yellow card, if you report it yourself, ends up in the bin. Which, you'd be very reasonable to think that. And nothing happens. There's the odd person who makes these statements, but nothing happens. So, I mean, I actually, because you can send a question into the MHRA board meetings, which I did, and you can tick a box to say, do you want to ask this live? Would you be prepared to ask this live? This was a few years ago. And so I got asked to say my question live, which was asking them about all the different ways that they were going to assess all these different safety things. So I asked my question. Alison Cave, the safety officer, she had it all on her laptop and she read out her answer. And my brain's going 10 to a dozen as she's reading this out because it was totally wrong what she was saying. And the chair at that time turned to me, Mrs. Granger, would you, is that answered your question? And I said, no. And I said that, can you explain to me why one, then I think the figures were coming out, 1 in 426 doses are leading to a serious side effect. Well, this isn't the platform to ask questions like that, he said. And I was shut down. And, so in America, at least they have times where you can ask the people in charge questions. As far as I can work out with the MHRA, the only time would be if you get asked to ask a question at the board meeting, because you can't query them. You can't follow it up and come in front of them and ask them questions that they need to be asked.
Do you think this will all, do you think this will all be like a bit like thalidomide many years later? We talked about in my own GMC tribunal the blood transfusion scandal. It comes out 30 years later, and the doctors were vilified at the time. And doctors like myself, I've been struck off for writing a handful of exemptions for people who didn't want this bioweapon in them to go and travel to see dying relatives. Criminal activity, apparently, which they couldn't produce any evidence of either. And secondly, calling out doctors. I called out doctors who were on TV or running NHS campaigns saying safe and effective in children, in pregnant women, and that was sold to the public as a harassment campaign. When I was zealous about calling out safety signals, ethical concerns I had, and always tried to remain evidence based. If the data doesn't exist, it doesn't exist, as we've covered in this conversation. To say it's safe in pregnant women is just an outright damn lie, an evil, dangerous. Oh, I've not got enough words in my vocabulary without swearing. It's disgusting. It's triggered me having this conversation just to know that one of the reasons I've been struck off is for calling out my safety concerns in pregnant women, saying, where is the data to back up your claim? It's actually sick.
Yeah. I mean,
I can't work
obviously,
now because of it as a doctor.
I know. Well, you find in different ways, which is good.
Yeah.
But all the people that were in this monitor, like all the people in the VSafe in the States, they never got the results of what they'd contributed to. And they must have felt really rejected, especially those who'd had a serious side effect that had reported it through the system. So I think there's more chance in the States of something being done than here. And if something does happen in the States, it will roll down to all the other countries. But the other thing is, it's happened everywhere. It's not just, and if you look at the authorities, they're just looking at little old UK on its own. It's happening everywhere, the same patterns over and over again. And, I mean, if somebody says that the vaccine saves so many lives, I'd like to see their evidence of that.
Problem we've got is that, I think you touched on it earlier, is that the whole of Big Pharma's future empire is built on the platform. So they don't want little old Dave Cartland and Cheryl Granger outing this, because guess what? They've got an mRNA platform for myocarditis. A lot of the problems that have been caused by the vaccine, they've got an mRNA solution. We've only just seen, I think it was this week or last, that they brought out a new mRNA-based, is it flu vaccine? I think they're just everything's built upon the platform of this, and they've even got another brand of COVID vaccine coming out in
That's why
2026. The government have
That's
announced.
why we really need to do the 1 in 7 to everybody and say this platform isn't safe, because they are going to go everything mRNA, modified RNA. And I know with Chimera, which is the cancer drug, they now know it causes secondary cancer. That's a bit of a bummer, isn't it? You're taking it for a cancer and you get a secondary cancer as a side effect. And they've got a black box on that. And it will keep happening. Headley Reese is onto this and has talked about it a lot. People will eventually wake up to what's happening. I mean, a lot of people know somebody who's died and lots of side effects from people who've taken the vaccines. And that's why, a lot of people in the NHS are not taking it anymore. They're not taking the flu anymore. So they see eventually what is happening to people. I mean, I run a little together group once a month, and every time anybody we meet up, they know more people who've died or more people who've had a peculiar cancer or what have you. It's happening over and over again. I mean, I've got friends who keep saying, I'm fed up of going to funerals. It must be because we're getting older. You know,
Where would you be? I mean, if you're an oncologist and you're seeing this, I was seeing it in primary care. In fact, my last day at work, I saw a young lady with gastric cancer, 31, and a lady who was
too young to have
28
it.
or 29 who had bilateral breast cancer. Both of them had had 3 jabs apiece. Now, you don't
Yeah.
see gastric cancer in that cohort.
No.
It's very rare to see bilateral breast cancer. And they'd all got one thing in common. They'd all had the bioweapon. And I've seen that all through my working career through the post-vaccine rollout era. People, young people with strokes and heart issues. In one of the surgeries I worked at, all 3 nurses had myo or pericarditis after the jab and refused to have any more, yet would still deliver them to the patient group despite not wanting them themselves. So you've got this paradoxical ethical compass that's been lost from the profession.
Oh,
And these poor
exactly.
people that I see most days now, they were in that group that you mentioned. They're either going to lots of funerals, or they're coming to
Mm.
me because they've been thrown on the scrap heap. They've got a turbo cancer. You've got weeks to live. What do I do? Help! Can you signpost me? Or the vaccine injured who have gone to their long COVID clinics 2 years after their injuries, utterly disabled, being told it's functional, aka they've made it up, or it's all in their head and it's a mental illness, and completely gaslit and abandoned for doing the right thing. And these are medical professionals. Where are the
I don't,
oncologists? Where are
I
they?
don't know how the medical professionals live with themselves. I really don't. I mean, if you're seeing cancer in younger people, in organs where it shouldn't be, because it's very rarely seen, in multiple organs, different types of cancer in one body, I mean, it doesn't fit a pattern. The pattern has completely changed. And therefore, why aren't they querying it?
Well, I was a family asked me to go to a post-mortem once, and I won't break confidentiality other than to say I went to watch the well-known shenanigans. And the coroner said to me as he completed the post-mortem, firstly, I said, how are you going to discern if it's a COVID jab-related death? And his comment to me was, oh, it's absolutely a COVID jab death. She had the COVID jab and her health deteriorated rapidly. I said, well, are you going to test the histology for spike protein or something to that effect? He said, oh, no, we don't do that. I said, so how are we going to evidence then that this death was? Anyway, as the inquest happened, he actually put down, after admitting to me privately that it was death by COVID jab, he said natural causes. And the same coroner said the same about another young man that died days after his jab. It was death by 1,000 clots induced by the AstraZeneca, natural causes. There's now natural about tens of clots in your pulmonary vasculature. And he put it
Yeah.
so when you've got coroners doing that, and oncologists and hematologists and obstetricians with their head deep in the sand, then we're never gonna, like you say, how do they
Yeah,
sleep with
well,
themselves?
I mean, coroners weren't working, were they? I mean, they weren't doing no post-mortems at the height of all this. And the other thing was death certificates. Doctors were able to sign a death certificate from afar. So my mum-in-law died, she was 101, and no medical person saw her to certify her. Her GP did it from his surgery. So the person that kind of certified she died was the manager of the care home. I mean, and since shipment, you were supposed to have 2 signatures,
Well, I used
and
to
you
be
were supposed
involved in that. It used to be a very robust process. I used to do the part two,
to,
so you'd question the certifying doctor, and you'd have to go and, the person who knew the patient the best had to go and see the patient in the morgue
yeah,
and identify. So the 2 people have to identify. You have to question the events leading up to the death. That went out the
yeah,
window. To like
yeah,
anyone could put anything the bloody hell they wanted on the death
mm,
certificate. I've heard
yeah,
conversations in my own coffee room when I worked back in the Midlands, and the husband had died on the toilet, literally, had
yeah,
urosepsis, looking at the A&E notes, when was discharged rather than admitted, died that night.
right,
And I remember hearing the story in the coffee room, and apparently he coughed. She heard coughing from the toilet, and she said, coughing, oh, he must have had COVID then. Let's put COVID down. This is a blatant urosepsis case, put down as COVID because they coughed and spluttered in the moments of death. That's how crazy it got. And no one would have questioned that. They'd have been, cremated pretty swiftly
yeah,
thereafter with no
yeah,
safeguard. And that's never come back as far as I know. I mean, last time I did a death
yeah,
certificate was months ago, and it was very quick box tick on a form and it goes off, no part two doctor. And that's
yeah,
in 2025.
yeah.
So how
I
do you
mean,
capture this
we
data?
all we all needed to have created more of a fuss. So my mum-in-law, as I say, she was 101. We were responsible for her, and she was in a care home. And we got a phone call about a week before she died to say she was going downhill. And I says, right, we're coming in. So this was beginning of May 2020. So the care home was all locked down and what have you. And I said, we're coming in, me and my 2 adult children will wear gloves, we'll wear masks. See, I made a big exception. I said, and we'll come in the back door, we'll go straight to her room and we won't speak to anybody but her. Oh, I said, yes, that's what I'm doing. So we went in and my daughter sang to Poppy and we danced down the bed and we hoped she could hear what we were saying to her and all the rest of it. Went away. And a week later we were told, this is it, she's going. So we did exactly the same thing again. No objection that time. And we went in and we were lucky that it was right at the beginning of it all, because obviously they hadn't got too many things in place. But they objected. And I just said, there's no more chance of us bringing anything into that home than you coming in every day. So I was stroppy and I got in. And I didn't believe that a 101-year-old woman should go out of this world without her people being around her. I just thought that was terrible. And that's what everybody should have done. But, you know, everybody was scared to death, weren't they? They had the fear put into them. But
made it up as they went along. Like you say, you can't come in, but we can't explain why you can't come in. Like you said, the person coming in from work, from the outside environment, would have had as much chance of spreading any deadly zombification disease.
But I said right from the start, every statement I made, I said, this is totally illogical and unscientific. And that just summed it up to me. I couldn't find any logic in it at all. And there was certainly no science behind it.
But to this day, I can't recall a single thing that I can say, even neutrally, and say, well, that actually did make sense. Really, that did make sense. I can't think of anything even now. You know, I am quite cynical these days, but nothing silly rules about distance and one way around the shop, and even my own church. You know, you've got to wear a mask until you sing. It's like, well, hang on, say that back to yourself. When you're singing, you're generating error. So I'll put your mask on if at any time, but you can take it off when you sing. Like, just listen to yourselves. So it's bonkers, absolutely nothing.
Yeah, absolutely illogical and what have you. And as I say, giving it to pregnant women when you won't give them soft cheeses, this whole list of stuff you can't eat, you're not supposed to drink, etc., etc., but you'll give a genetically engineered novel treatment. It's the most ridiculous thing ever, because
so let's say, just to close now, really, you're in a room with 100 obstetricians who are pushing this vaccine. What are you going to say to them in summary, apart from shaking them?
I'd basically point out what the MHRA have told us, that 1 in 7 get a serious adverse reaction, and remind them what serious categories we have, and that is that what they want to inject in their pregnant cohort. It's
and there's no ad hominem they can give to that. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a published figure in a report that you've had to kick and scream to get documented. But that's absolutely right. 1 in 7 severe adverse.
Well, that's the thing. That's why I want to get the word out, because we've managed to get them to publish it. I didn't win my case, but we got them to publish it. And, you know, the ICO saying that we need the people, the MHRA, to do their own analysis. Well, it's rubbish. It's not good.
The problem we've got, Cheryl, is if we sent this interview, for example, to every obstetrician up and down the land, they won't watch it. They just won't. Like, I've been in coffee rooms and tried to bring data to people and articles from published journals, and they walk out. So it's about getting them to sit down and watch something like this for an hour, just because you can't argue with this, can you? 1 in 7. It is what it is.
I mean, to say it's in their own words. I can send them the published paper, you know. And the head of the chief of safety was one of the authors, Alison Cave, and Traguno, who was the witness that they used. One of the answers to one of the things he said, well, of course, we all know that vaccines don't cause autism. I don't know where that came from and why it all fitted in, but that's the sort of person he is. He's in charge of patient safety. So they had their top people writing this, who obviously show that they don't know what they're talking about.
Well, I call them useful idiots, because they get to the top, and that's when, in any NHS hierarchy I've ever worked in, hospitals or primary care, those people who make it to the top are the yes men. They've got the back pockets stuffed full of big pharma dollars and conflicts of interests, mainly undeclared. You know, like we mentioned, MHRA's investment portfolio and GMCs as well. So you've got these useful idiots at the very top, and you know the little minions like me at the bottom that raise these concerns. They're, you know, off with his head, aka strike them off. They made examples of any doctor that's spoken at in the UK as non-standard than I see.
It's got to be numbers, hasn't it? It's got to be everybody saying no. It's got to be everybody or the vast majority. Apparently, you don't need a 50%. You can do it with less than that, but you need a big cohort of people saying this is all wrong.
I keep reminding my cohort, and I harp on about it quite a lot, but there is a professional regulation called the duty of candour. The duty of candour, and I keep saying it's not a choice, it's a duty. So, but essentially, if you mess up for the goodness of, ironically, confidence in the profession and maintaining that sacred doctor-patient relationship, which apparently I broke, we've got to speak up, and everyone's got to do it. And yeah, it might not look great, but admit your mistakes. It's one of the hardest things to do in real life, let alone in medicine. But if you mess up, you mess up, and this is beyond messing up. This is criminal. I don't know what to call it. Genocide, democide.
Yeah. And people are now, they're looking around for natural solutions. They're going away from pharmaceutical products. The people who've got cancers might have tried some chemo, but they've moved on to other things, your ivermectin and your fenbendazole and what have you, and they are getting quite good results by all accounts. I do know a few people myself who have tried that route and have had good results. So there are other ways of doing these things. And again,
you've got to remember, we live in a land where it's illegal to make a claim that you can cure cancer. That in and of itself is a sinister law, isn't it? You find yourself in a lot of trouble if you make that claim. And we both share kind of contacts and people that we know that have tried the alternative treatments and have succeeded. And again, I hear the stories back when the oncologist has got that patient in the room, my brain tumor's gone, or my mets have disappeared. What have you? First thing I would do is sit them down and get a pen and paper and write down exactly what they took and when they took it, because you've cured yourself of cancer and you didn't have any chemo or radio. What did you do? But they're not interested. They're disinterested in that. And that to me stinks of, well, I can't explain that away. If I've got somebody who's cured their own cancer, I want to know what.
But again, it comes down to defining the problem properly. So what actually is cancer? Cholesterol isn't a problem. Starving your brain of cholesterol and reducing it causes dementia. It's understanding the problem, and we've got these set things in medicine that's just accepted, and the treatments keep coming out for the same old thing, and it's not making it any better. So you've not got your problem right. You need to define it better and work on better solutions, and that's what I wish the medical profession would actually do, or the pharmaceutical companies would actually do. But all they do is see it as creating chronic disease that gives them a lot of money.
Patient cured is a customer lost, that old saying. Cheryl, thank you ever so much for your time this morning. You're an absolute legend. I bet when the MHRA open their mail and see a letter with your signature on it, they must get palpitations. But you've been an absolute warrior getting this information out, because they didn't want to give it, did they? They certainly didn't want to give it.
Can I send you my contact so that you can put it at the bottom of the...
Please do, yeah. I'm going to, all the things that we've talked about, any references, links and all that will be added to the Substack, and it'll go on the YouTube channel too. So
yeah.
Keep spreading the word, Cheryl. I'll try and share this everywhere, because, people need to know this, in particular obstetricians, midwives and pregnant women, to not touch this with a barge pole.
Well, if you can think of anybody else I can speak to as well, that's good. I'm just trying to let everybody know, because it's straight from the horse's mouth, isn't it?
Yeah, it's facts and data, which they like. They call it conspiracy theory, but they're actually conspiracy facts. So, on that note, Cheryl, have a great day. Thank you ever so much for the conversation, and look after yourself.
Thanks very much.